The laughter was already loud before I even got through the front door. I could hear it from the porch, that particular kind of laughter that belongs to people who are completely comfortable, people who have never once questioned whether they belong in a room. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the door handle, breathing cold December air into my lungs, and I told myself what I always told myself before walking into that house: stay calm, stay quiet, get through it. The moment I stepped inside, the warmth hit me like a wall. Christmas lights were strung from every surface. The tree in the corner was the same artificial one my parents had used for 15 years, and it still leaned slightly to the left no matter how many times my father tried to fix it. The smell of sweet potato casserole and roasted chicken floated out of the kitchen, and for one single second, it almost felt like home. Then my sister Daphne spotted me from across the room. She was seated at the dining table, her arm looped through the arm of a man I had not yet seen clearly. Her hair was done in loose waves, her lipstick was perfectly applied, and she was wearing a red dress that I was certain she had purchased specifically so that people would tell her she looked stunning in it. She probably had. She was smiling the way she always smiled when she had an audience, wide and bright, and just sharp at the edges if you knew where to look. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Everyone, my little sister is here." There were maybe 10 people seated around that table. Aunts, uncles, a few cousins I only ever saw at holidays. They all turned to look at me at once, and I smiled back, because that was the only weapon I had ever been allowed to carry in that house. "Come sit down," my mother called from the kitchen doorway. "We are almost ready to eat." I set my bag down near the door and started making my way around the table, saying hello to relatives, accepting hugs from the ones who offered them. I was almost to my seat when Daphne reached out and touched the arm of the man beside her. "This is Garrett," she announced, not just to me, but to the entire table. "My boyfriend. He is doing incredibly well. He just got a promotion at work, and he is probably going to make partner by next year, so." She said it the way she said everything, like a statement designed to remind everyone in the room where they stood in relation to her. I turned to look at Garrett for the first time, and he looked at me. The smile on his face did not fall immediately. It took about 2 full seconds. 2 seconds where I watched him process what he was seeing, watched something shift behind his eyes, like a gear catching and locking into place. The color that left his face went quietly, like heat leaving a room when someone opens a window in winter. I held his gaze steadily and said, "It is good to see you again, Garrett." Daphne frowned, her eyes moving between the two of us. "You two know each other?" Nobody at that table knew what to say. Garrett opened his mouth and then closed it again. I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Let us eat," I said. "But before I tell you what happened at that table, I need to take you back, because none of what you are about to hear makes any sense without understanding what that house did to me first." I grew up in a home where the rules were simple, even if they were never spoken out loud. Daphne was the one that mattered, not because she was cruel, or not only because of that, but because she was first, and she was brilliant, and she had figured out from an early age exactly how to make adults love her. She was the kind of child who got perfect marks without appearing to try, who remembered the names of every teacher's spouse and every neighbor's pet, who laughed at exactly the right moments and cried at exactly the right ones too. I was 4 years younger, and I was none of those things. I was quiet, I asked too many questions, I liked taking things apart to see how they worked, and I was not always successful at putting them back together. I read books that were too old for me and struggled through the ones I was supposed to be reading. I didn't have Daphne's easy confidence or her effortless charm, and because I didn't, I was always slightly out of focus in that family, like a photograph where everyone else was sharp and I was blurred at the edges. My mother was not a cruel woman. She loved me. I believe that fully, even now. But she had a way of expressing love that came wrapped in comparison, and the comparison was always the same. Daphne had all A's when she was your age, she would say, looking at my report card with something not quite disappointment, but very close to it. Why is it so hard for you to just apply yourself the way she does? My father was quieter about it, but the silence was its own kind of message. When Daphne won a scholarship in her junior year of high school, he took the whole family to dinner to celebrate. When I got a commendation from my science teacher for a project I had worked on for 3 months, he said, "That is good, sweetheart," and went back to the game on television. Daphne herself was more direct. She had a talent for it, for finding the exact phrase that would land and stay, the kind of words that do not shout but settle like sediment at the bottom of a glass, until eventually they become the thing you are made of. "You know you are never going to be successful, right?" she said to me once. I was 16. We were in the kitchen after dinner, and I had made the mistake of telling her that I was thinking about starting a small business making and selling handmade jewelry to classmates. I thought it was a good idea. I had done the math. She laughed, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. "That is cute," she said, "but come on, be realistic about who you are." I did not respond. I went to my room and sat on the bed for a long time in the dark. That was the thing about Daphne's particular brand of cruelty. It never gave you something to fight back against. It always arrived disguised as honesty, as concern, as the kind of hard truth that someone who loves you is brave enough to say. And because it wore that disguise so well, no one around us ever seemed to see it for what it was. The breaking point did not come all at once. It built the way pressure builds, slowly, invisibly, until the thing that was supposed to hold gives way all at once. I was 22. I had just finished a business degree from a state university, not the prestigious private school Daphne had attended on her scholarship, but a solid program with a good faculty, and I had worked hard in it. I had come home for Thanksgiving that year with a plan. I had been offered a position at a small technology startup downtown, and I was also in early conversations with a mentor who believed in my ideas and wanted to help me build something of my own. I was not there yet, but I could see the road ahead of me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I made the mistake of sharing that at dinner. Daphne was there with 2 of her friends from law school, women who wore their credentials the way other people wore jewelry. My mother had invited them without asking me, which was typical. The table was full, the wine was open, and I genuinely believed that I was among people who would be glad to hear something good. "I'm actually in talks to potentially co-found a company," I said, during a pause in the conversation. "It's still early, but I'm really excited about the direction." There was a moment of silence. Then Daphne tilted her head the way she always did when she was about to perform understanding. "Oh, that's interesting. What kind of company?" "Technology, data infrastructure. I know it sounds abstract, but the market need is real, and my mentor has significant experience in the space." "Your mentor," she repeated, and smiled at her friends. "How sweet. So you found someone to hold your hand through it." One of her friends laughed. The other looked at her wineglass. "Daphne," my mother said, but it was the kind of correction that doesn't actually want to correct anything, the kind that just wants to appear to have tried. "I'm just being honest," Daphne said. "You've always had big ideas, sweetheart. That's a lovely quality, but running a company takes more than big ideas. It takes discipline, connections, a real track record. You've been out of school for what, 6 months?" "5 months," I said. "Right.
5 months. She looked at me with that expression that had always made me feel like I was standing very far away from everything I wanted. I looked at my plate. I looked at the table. I looked at my mother, who was rearranging the food on her own plate and not looking at me. And something inside me made a decision that my mouth did not announce. I finished dinner. I helped clear the dishes. I said goodnight to everyone with a normal smile on my face. I went upstairs to the room that had been mine for 22 years, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought very clearly and very quietly, I am never doing this again. Not the dinner, not the room, not the performance of being small so that other people could feel large. I left the following week. I told my parents I was moving to an apartment closer to work. I told them the truth, which was that I needed space to build something without the weight of their expectations or their lack of them sitting on my chest. What I didn't tell them was what I was about to build. The first 2 years were genuinely hard. I want to be honest about that, because the story isn't worth anything if I pretend it was easy. There were months where I was eating the same 4 things on rotation, because that was what the budget allowed. There were nights I sat alone in my apartment with a spreadsheet open on my laptop and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as the gap between who I was and who I was trying to become, and wondering whether that gap would ever close. My mentor, a woman named Harriet, who had spent 20 years building and exiting companies before anyone knew her name, told me once that the gap was not the problem. She said, "The gap is the work. You're not behind, you're just in the part nobody sees." I held on to that. Some days it was the only thing I held on to. What I was building, with Harriet's guidance and my own grinding hours, was a data infrastructure firm. We helped mid-sized companies organize, protect, and leverage their internal data in ways that gave them a real competitive edge. It was not glamorous. It did not have a consumer-facing product or a clever name that would trend on the internet. It was the kind of company that solved real problems for real organizations, quietly, efficiently, and extremely well.
By the end of year 2, we had 4 clients. By the end of year 3, we had 18. By the time I was 27, the company had 31 employees, solid contracts with several regional institutions, and a reputation in our space that I was deeply proud of. We were not a household name. That was intentional. Harriet had taught me early that the most powerful position in any room is the one where you know exactly who everyone else is before they know anything about you. I kept my family at a comfortable distance through all of it. Holiday calls, the occasional visit. I did not post about my work on social media. I did not bring it up in conversation. As far as my family knew, I was working in tech stuff for a company downtown, living a modest and unremarkable life. As far as Daphne knew, nothing had changed. She called me in October, about 6 weeks before Christmas. She sounded more animated than usual, which, with Daphne, always meant she was building to something. "I want you to know that I am genuinely happy," she said. "Like, for the first time in a long time, I feel like my life is exactly where it is supposed to be. Garrett is wonderful. He is the kind of man who has his life together, you know? He works at a tech company downtown. He's rising fast. He has real ambition." A pause. "I think you would actually have a lot to talk about." "What company does he work at?" I asked. She told me the name. I set the phone down on my knee for a moment and stared at the wall. Then I picked it back up and said, "He sounds great, Daphne. I'm glad you are happy." "You're going to love him," she said. "Everyone does." I said nothing to correct her. I said nothing at all. Only the real ones make it this far. Comment where you are watching from and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Christmas dinner arrived the way it always did, with too much food and not enough honesty. The table was set, the relatives were seated, and everyone was performing the version of themselves they only brought out for holidays.
My Uncle Leland was telling a story he had told every December for the past 8 years. My aunt was refilling her own wine glass before anyone else's had finished. My mother moved between the kitchen and the table with the focused energy of a woman who was using activity to avoid stillness. And Daphne sat at the center of it all, exactly where she had always been, with Garrett beside her and that smile on her face that told everyone in the room she had arrived. I sat down. Garrett had not spoken since the moment I said his name. He was holding his fork in a way that suggested he had forgotten what forks were for. Daphne was watching him, then watching me, then watching him again. I could see the math happening behind her eyes. She was trying to calculate the distance between what she thought she knew and what she could feel was wrong. "So," she said, directing the question at the table, but aiming it squarely at me, "what is everyone up to these days? I feel like I never hear what's going on with people." Various relatives offered various answers. Someone had remodeled their kitchen, someone's son had started college. My aunt mentioned a trip she was planning. Then Daphne looked directly at me. "What about you?" she said. "What have you been doing with yourself lately?" She said it with that particular lilt, not quite condescending, not quite curious, but balanced exactly halfway between the two in a way that made it impossible to challenge without looking sensitive. It was a masterpiece of casual dismissal. She had been perfecting it for 30 years. "I have been busy," I said. "Busy doing what, though?" She laughed a little, glancing at Garrett. "She's always so mysterious about it. You'd think she was running a country or something." The laughter at the table was light and polite. Garrett did not laugh. He was looking at his plate with the focused attention of a man who was trying very hard to do nothing that might draw attention to himself, which of course was doing exactly that. My Uncle Leland noticed and raised an eyebrow. My mother noticed and frowned. "Garrett," Daphne said, nudging him slightly with her elbow, "are you okay? You have barely said anything since she walked in." "I'm fine," he said. He stopped, cleared his throat. "I didn't realize you two were sisters." "Why would that matter?" Daphne said, still smiling but with something cooling underneath it now. "It doesn't matter," he said carefully. "It's just—" Another pause, longer than the first. "I know her, from work." The table went quiet in the particular way that tables go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. "From work," Daphne repeated. "You work in completely different fields." "We're actually in the same field," I said, and my voice was very calm, the way water is calm on top while the current runs hard underneath. The word landed. Company. My mother set down her serving spoon. My aunt looked up from her wine glass. Leland leaned back in his chair with an expression on his face that suggested he was suddenly very interested in where this was going. "Your company," Daphne said slowly. "Yes." I looked at Garrett. "How long have you been with us now? About 8 months?" He nodded once, stiffly. 8 months, he confirmed. "Since April." "And you are doing good work," I said. "Genuinely. The Hartwell account review you submitted in October was sharp. I read it." The silence at that table was the kind that fills a room the way water fills a sealed container, completely, all the way to the edges. Daphne's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion first, then a kind of recalculation, then something that looked almost like the ground shifting under her. "You are his boss?" she said. "I am the founder and chief executive, so technically I am everyone's boss, but yes." "That is—" she stopped, started again. "You never said anything about running a company." "You never asked," I said. "You were usually too busy telling me I would never be successful to ask what I was actually doing." The words were quiet. They did not perform. They did not shout. They simply landed on the table between us and stayed there, and everyone at that table heard them, and no one at that table said a word. My mother opened her mouth and then closed it again. My father was looking at his hands. Then my Uncle Leland laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine startled delight, the way a person laughs when they witness something unexpected and true. Daphne's expression had settled into something I had never seen on her face before. Not embarrassment, exactly. Daphne did not embarrass easily. It was something closer to the particular discomfort of a person who has just understood all at once that the map they were using was completely wrong. "I did not mean it like that," she said. I was trying to be realistic with you." "You were trying to keep me small," I said. "And I understand why. It's easier to be the successful one when the comparison is a failure. I get it. I really do." I looked at her steadily. "But I am not a failure, Daphne. I never was. You just needed me to be one." She looked at her plate. My mother made a sound that might have been my name. I turned to her and I said something I had been carrying for a very long time without knowing exactly where to put it. "I am not angry," I told her. "I want you to know that. But when Daphne said I would never be successful, you sat there. You have always sat there. And I needed someone to say something just once, and no one ever did, so I stopped waiting for it." "We are proud of you," my father said. His voice was rough in the way voices get when the thing being said has been held in too long. "I know," I said. "I can see that you are proud right now, today, in this moment, and I believe it is real. But I built this thing without you, without any of you. Not to hurt you, but because I had to. Because the only way I could become who I am was to stop trying to do it inside a room where everyone had already decided who I was going to be." No one spoke. The Christmas lights blinked softly. The sweet potato casserole was getting cold. Somewhere in the kitchen, the timer on the oven was ticking. Garrett was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read, partly professional mortification, partly something that looked like respect. Daphne had not moved. She was sitting very still in her red dress, and for the first time in my life, she looked exactly her age. I picked up my napkin, set it beside my plate, and stood up. "The food smells wonderful," I said to my mother. "I am sorry I cannot stay. I have an early call tomorrow with a client overseas, and I still have some preparation to do." "You are leaving?" my mother said. "I came," I said. "I wanted to come. I wanted to see everyone. But I think I have stayed as long as I need to." I looked at Daphne one final time. "I hope you have a good Christmas. I mean that." She looked up at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something. Her mouth opened slightly, but whatever it was, she kept it. I put on my coat. I said goodbye to my uncle and my aunt and the cousins whose names I always had to remind myself of. I hugged my mother, briefly, and I could feel her holding on a beat longer than usual. I walked out of the front door into the cold December night. The air was clean and quiet and completely still. There were Christmas lights on all the houses down the block, and somewhere, a few streets over, someone was playing music through an open window, something slow and warm and a little melancholy, the way December music almost always is. I stood on the porch for a moment, the same way I had stood when I arrived, breathing in the cold air. But I was not talking myself into staying calm this time. I was not bracing myself for anything. I was just standing there in the night, in my own life, a life that no one in that room believed in, a life that no one in that room built but me. And I felt something settle inside my chest that I recognized after a moment as the specific quiet of a person who has finally, completely put something down. I walked to my car, I got in, I drove home, and I did not look back. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, do not forget to like and subscribe for more.